Well, for the record, my least favorite bird in the animal kingdom is probably the seagull. They make a lot of noise. They're reluctant to fly. They steal stuff. And when they do fly, it's usually just to get to the next place where they steal something. Yet surprisingly, watching those guys for the last 2.5 weeks or so, I learned something. In 2 solid weeks of going to the beach, I never once saw a seagull take off or land other than directly into the oncoming wind. They have an uncanny ability to always know where the wind is from and always operate, takeoff and landing directly into the wind. I even tried chasing some of them downwind to see if I could get them to fly downwind, and they would run a 180-degree circle around me and take off past me going upwind. I suppose somebody somewhere's got documentation of a seagull taking off downwind or landing downwind, but I never saw it happen in nature. As you might imagine, I decided if that's the way the seagulls flew, I was going to try to incorporate that philosophy from that point on into my PPG flying, and I was going to determine myself to make certain that I did nothing but take off and land directly into the wind. It seems to be working out for me fairly well. Anyhow, with the memories of Florida still fresh in my mind, I've suffered some bad weather here in the Carolinas. It's just been low ceilings in the mornings and thunderstorms in the afternoon, so I haven't been able to get out and get any more video. So I have worked on putting together this little piece, and here's some things that I know. Now, part of this is long overdue because some of you had commented a long time ago about how I should shorten the brake lines on my Mac Paracharger 28. As some of you had suggested, I never did shorten the brake lines. I messed around with them a little bit. I tied them an inch shorter. I tied them at 1.2 inches shorter. I even used some cheater handles that were made out of PVC pipe until I awaited the delivery of some specialty balls that fit above the brake lines. And as I discussed in this portion of flying, I never actually utilized them. Now I believe the brakes are a very good fit for the glider. Say, yeah, dude. My favorite bird. Hi, buddy. So let's talk about a couple things. Hey, I had a couple people ask me about brake line length early on in my PPG flying. And this wing had never been flown when I got it. It was brand new. I never had a chance to have an instructor fly it for me, and I think that the excessively long brake line length was a result of the main lines never having been stretched under flight loads. So I resisted the temptation to change the brake line length because the manual was pretty clear that the brakes were set up for mid-hanging point hook in. And you can see they trail a little bit behind right there, but not excessively. I've seen other guys with more slack than that. And then, let's see, somebody talked me into trying out some line balls, brake line pull balls. They tie onto the brake line above the handles, and they give you a higher handle point, about 6 inches more of brake travel for landing. But I think I was just not getting aggressive enough on the brakes. So as time went by, I ended up working more to get those brakes down behind my thighs on full extension landing. And that made a big difference in my landings, the speed of my landings, and I kind of pretty much gave up on the idea at that point of worrying about shortening the lines. I think too the main riser lines ended up stretching a bit, and by stretching they gave me a lot more length in the risers and a lot less worry about the brake line length. This little tab that's still here, I've been instructed by a couple posters to cut that off, but I've decided I'm not going to, because you never know, I may fly this from a high hook-in point and then I would have to reline the brakes. The most important thing that the temporary PVC handles above the brake toggles did for me was to serve as a mental reminder as I approached landing to pull full brakes. Getting full brake extension with my wrists and the total distance of my arms really improved my flare profile and seems to be working out still to this day now. So let's talk about travel. Coming up, we got Oshkosh. I know a lot of you guys go out to Oshkosh. I'm torn. I got invited to an event in North Carolina. It's a week and a half after that, and I may even be able to convince my wife to go if I do that. Oshkosh on the tail end of Florida here would be an awfully lot of travel, especially for a guy that doesn't want to travel anymore. So I think I'm going to probably pass on Oshkosh now that I think about it. There was a time when I went back in the early 80s on through the mid 90s. I probably went 10 or 12 times, and then I took a couple of years off and went back a couple more times. But pretty much the group of general aviation guys that I hang around with now that have home-built airplanes or experimental airplanes, they all go down to Sun and Fun, and it's earlier. It's not as crazy because the travel crowds aren't as big as they are in the summertime. I haven't made any hotel reservations for Oshkosh. I'd have to camp, which isn't the end of the world. I'm not above camping. Well, it's just not my favorite activity. And I'd have to worry about that. Hey, one of the things that I had mentioned earlier in one of my previous videos was that these detractors, these guys that are telling everyone they need to buy specific equipment or that they need to buy specific training, there's just no other option. Those guys, they're not going to go to the FAA and call for regulatory oversight of themselves. For crying out loud, they don't even begin to know how to behave in that environment. That is way out of their league. And my point was not to try to create a call for regulation or change to FAR 103. My point was that these guys clamoring that you need to buy their training is not about safety. It's about equipment sales. That's the whole point of why I was saying that. So, hey, there's a couple dolphins, a little family pod of dolphins right down there. They're up on the surface, all three of them. They're probably thinking I'm a giant hawk or something. And I was out earlier this morning, I saw a huge pod of something, but these guys are just lollygagging on the surface down there, just enjoying Florida like I am. These brown, muddy rip current areas here, pretty stirred up, probably full of marine life, shrimp, all kinds of things. So we talked about travel. Oh yeah, let's talk about this wing. A couple of guys have asked about this wing. It's the Mac Paracharger in the 28-meter dimension. Now, a buddy of mine just picked up a Mac Paracharger Freestyle, and it's a different animal. It has a lot more parabolic shape to it. and its parabolic shape is gives it a significantly larger amount of roll rate, a little bit less projected area, a little bit less stability, but different animal altogether. I think it's a totally different wing. I haven't flown it. I saw his instructor fly it pretty aggressively, and it had pretty good roll rates. Tended to swing him laterally back and forth under the wing like a teeter-totter almost. Not so much fore and aft, but left and right. And it really gave him a lot of turning capability, turning radius. So I don't know, my next wing, I'm sure enjoying this one. It's easy to fly, it's easy to launch. At first I thought it was going to be way too small for me, but between running and working out, running around with the paramotor on my back, I lost about 10 or 11 pounds. So I'm much more closer to the middle of the envelope for flying with the motor on now than I was. And I just don't have that desire to do a whole lot of yanking and banking and aggressive aerobatics. I did a lot of that in general aviation airplanes when I was younger, learning how to fly. And had buddies that flight instructed in various airplanes or particular FBOs that had aerobatic courses. I'd occasionally go down and see them and take a flight or two. But on this thing, I'm perfectly content to fly along the beach and watch people fish. I had a guy moon me earlier. It's always a guy. I don't know why. That kind of stuff is not really what I had in mind. But sightseeing, looking at property development, weather patterns, all kinds of cool stuff out in nature. That's a different story. Different than out there doing all the acro work. And I'm learning that there's quite a few other people that they're all about the acro avoidance also. They're, pardon me, they're out just sightseeing, enjoying the area that they live in, checking out their property or their livestock or local parts of the country that they live in. There's an interesting fella, he's Irish, and I've been watching a lot of his videos. He had his prop bolts come loose. Well, a couple of us convinced him to drill his prop bolts and wire them in a standard aircraft style prop bolt wiring configuration where you put a hole in each bolt and then you wire two bolts together so that they're wired across one another, so there's no way for the two of them to become loose as a unit. It's not possible. So in order for one to loosen, it's tightening the other one, and there's not enough slack in the wire. There's lots of tutorials on how to do that online if you're interested. But he fixed his bolts and wired them. He did a real nice job wiring them up. Jerry, my hat's off to you. That looked really nice. Then he had an engine failure. Had nothing to do with the bolts. So I'm glad to see that he was okay. He did damage his trike, mostly on the rollout and trying to taxi a crosswind. But he wasn't hurt. And that's one nice thing about the paramotor and the two cycles lack of reliability is that there's several ways to get back on the ground, and it usually always involves some low speed. Now if you land downwind, that's a different story. If you have the ability to maneuver or the presence of mind to land into the wind, like somebody said, just keep turning until the earth stops going under you so fast. All right, well, my Florida flying adventure is about done, so I'm going to be heading back to South Carolina here shortly. And more flying adventures there. I do think I'm going to head up to that flying in North Vale, North Carolina, at Rebel Field. Somebody threw out an invitation to a group on Facebook. Seems like a good group of guys. I like the posts that they make. They're by and large pretty reasonable group of people. I haven't met any of them personally, but I'd like to. So not going in there that time. I got to go around. Well, that's it for flying in Florida. All done. So here's what I don't know. I understand the need for the low torque settings, especially with a wooden propeller and changes in humidity and the tendency for the wood to swell and contract. But why have these manufacturers chosen not to wire their bolts? I've decided to machine a drill jig so that I could drill through the bolt heads, but I have yet to do so because I don't quite understand the philosophy of what the manufacturers were intending by not having safety wired prop bolts. I'm already working on my next video, and it's predominantly going to be about the trimmer adjustment range and the flight characteristics at the different trim settings for the Mac Paracharger. It's going to be pretty intense, and I'm still searching for the vocabulary to finish that up, so hopefully I'll see you then. But the only way we can count on that for sure is if you click that subscribe button right below this screen.